Yo! How is everybody? This is Gene. I think it's been, 3 weeks since the last time I made a video? Uh, Life be crazy is basically it. Life be crazy. My life has been upside down and all around since the beginning of this year, and it just won't stop. Somebody upped the difficulty level from hard to, extreme and didn't tell me. I am most upset. But, anyway, I hope everyone is well. For those who are maybe newer to my channel, this happens on occasion. I'm not a professional or regular uh, content creator in the traditional sense. There will be times where I make several videos in a day or I make several videos a week. Most of the time I can get a video out maybe once a week, but there will be times where a video, it might take me 2 weeks, it might take me 3 weeks, because again, I have a real life to live, a real job to take care of, and that's going to eat up a lot of my time, especially as we move into summer and my work ratchets up and everything else. A lot of stuff is up in the air and in flux, and I'm the person tasked with holding it all together. Joy. But anyway, enough about me griping about the state of my life. Hope everyone is doing well, or if you're not doing well, I hope you do better. As RJ posted on my community tab a few days ago, I am well aware of, of a Streets of Rage movie being in the works, as it says here, with a script from the John Wick creator, and I have concerns. The Streets of Rage franchise, in particular Streets of Rage 2, is near and dear to my heart. I have played, let me just explain the games I've played. I played the original Streets of Rage. I grew up playing Streets of Rage 2. The second game is the first Streets of Rage game I ever played. The later ones I played, I think, as an adult, because the only one I had growing up was Streets of Rage 2. Then when they started releasing like the Sega Genesis collection and all those type of things on PlayStation, then you got the whole trilogy. But ultimately, I've played the first three games. I think the first one's good. The second one is pretty much a masterpiece. The third one I was not a fan of. I played Fighting Force when that came out. I think in the late 90s or early 2000s. That was kind of like a spiritual successor to Streets of Rage at the time. It was supposed to be Streets of Rage 4 at that time, but then stuff happened and it ended up being its own thing. Anyway, I did not like that game at all. Uh, in the mid 2000s, there was a Streets of Rage style beat 'em up based on the film The Warriors, that 70s like gang film. Warriors, come out and play! That whole thing. I played that, found that game way too difficult. Found it way too difficult. I returned it nearly immediately. Like, I'm playing on easy, and like, I still can't figure out what to do. And unfortunately, game guides and whatnot didn't quite exist the same way they do now online. But I just did not like that game. It was entirely way too difficult. And so basically, there are other games. What was it, like the Bouncer or whatever it was? That was like a beat 'em up, right? In like the earlier mid 2000s. That was much more anime-ish though. That was my brother's thing. He liked it. I didn't. So the only one I haven't played in recent years is SOR 4, which I was stoked to hear. It's just that life gets in the way, and I have to get a proper gaming setup again. Is basically it. But at some point, I will play Streets of Rage 4. But when it comes to Streets of Rage or Streets of Rage style games, I have played several of them throughout my life. I think the only title I've never actually played outside of SOR 4 itself that's a beat 'em up is probably Final Fight, which was always the NES equivalent, right? Guy, Cody, Hagar, all that. I've never actually played any of the Final Fight games. Not for not wanting to, just never got around to it. Probably because I didn't grow up with having a lot of Nintendo systems. I grew up with a Sega. But anyway, this is about Streets of Rage. Now, I'm going to explain why as best I can. why I have concerns about this, right? And why I'm not exactly stoked. Because I've seen a lot of people, be very stoked and be very happy. And a lot of people say, well, it's John Wick, the guy doing John Wick. Let me explain the various concerns I have about this. First of all, the red woman in the room, Blaze, right? If you're familiar with Blaze's design, you know that it is pretty sexy, right? It's usually a red halter top, right? Usually a red mini skirt, boots, right? Long flowing hair. In the SOR4 version, they gave her this really cool leather jacket, and you can see even here. This is the art from the first Streets of Rage game. She has a red leather jacket here. It's very very 80s, right? Thriller and all that. But she's always been sexy, right? She's always been the sexy, beautiful ass kicker. And as we saw, in particular with the Cowboy Bebop adaptation, and how they altered her face costume, and how the actress Daniela Pineda responded to the outcry over those changes. I am concerned that, especially because here's the thing, people will mention John Wick and all that. Even the creator of John Wick has people he has to answer to, right? There's media, especially dishonest gaming media, you know, who are going to focus in on the way Blaze looks, right? We're all aware of the fact that this whole, in my opinion, bad faith take on hypersexualization and sexy women in games and how it's supposedly objectifying and all that, right? I don't trust them. I don't trust the people involved to make a game accurate outfit for Blaze. I don't think that they're going to create a movie where your lead female character is running around in a halter top and in a red miniskirt doing high kicks or throwing people over her shoulder or whatever it is. Just because it works in a video game doesn't necessarily mean it works in film. And when you have Hollywood, which everyone involved in this is going to be a part of, they're going to be part of Hollywood, that, uh, that, how do I put this? Seems to dislike the sexy woman, the sexy, feminine, powerful woman that was popular in the 80s and 90s, right? They've seemed to completely reject that type of female representation now. Now she must be androgynous, she must be modest, she must be very masculine, and that's not what Blaze is. I have no problem with the androgynous and masculine characters. That's fine, but that's not Blaze. And I'm concerned that, similar to what they did with what's her face. Um, oh, why does her name escape me? Tila. There we go. Tila in the He-Man cartoon, right. The animated one, not the CGI one, the Kevin Smith thing. I'm concerned that they might do to Blaze what they did to Tila, right? Make her very butch, very masculine. Give her this vitriolic relationship with Axel, the white dude in the middle. So there's that. There's my first concern. The depiction of Blaze. I have no reason to believe that they would say game accurate. I mean, look for example at Halo. They've taken the Halo games and basically just tried to make them Mass Effect. And it's like, why not just adapt Mass Effect if that's what you wanted? Right? Where we are talking about creators and other individuals who do not care for the source material, even if that source material comes from a fairly simple, straightforward 1990s video game. Right? So there's that. There's my sort of first issue. My second issue is the fact, I would say, the violence, right? The thing about Streets of Rage is that if you think about it, if you try to imagine the events of the Streets of Rage game, whichever one it is that you've played, be it the newer one, the fourth one, or the first one, or the second one, which I think most people are familiar with, and it's probably the game that they're going to adapt because that's the most famous title. If you think about the violence in in those games, if you try to imagine it relatively realistically, you take the over the top video game elements out of it. You have a pretty gritty, violent movie, right? Pretty gritty, pretty violent movie where you have basically three cops or two ex-officers because Adam, who's the dude in the yellow, the black guy in the yellow, he gets kidnapped by Mr. X in Streets of Rage 2. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers for a nearly 30-year-old game. But you have a video game where you have basically your hero gang, if you want to look at it like that, right? Of at least 1 to 4 players. They're probably going to have four characters, four main characters. Walking around, apparently it's called Wood Oak City. It's more or less the movie version of New York City in the 80s and 90s, which was not too dissimilar to how the city actually was at that time. But you have these people walking around, running around, beating the crap out of thugs, out of gangbangers, using everything from their fist to their feet, to knives to pipes, lead pipes that you would find under your sink. And those are the relatively more tame weapons. As you get later on in the game, you start using weapons like katanas, like Japanese swords, because you start encountering ninjas and 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 all of this stuff, right? It's going to be a fairly gritty, violent movie, and I'm not sure that Hollywood necessarily wants that from this type of video game, right? I would say that as your sort of baseline for the violence in the movie, you would need, or rather, examples. I would say are probably the Street Fighter Two movie, the Japanese version, right? That's a pretty violent film. I would say the violence is that's a good baseline for where the violence needs to be. Or 80s movies and 70s movies like The Warriors or Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, those type of films. So you're looking at like a more or less an R-rated film, right? In the realm of violence, right? The last R-rated film that they did recently that I know of is the Birds of Prey film. Like that's the closest thing I can honestly think of to like Streets of Rage and sort of like structure, right? You have like this girl gang, and they're going around, beating people up and wrecking the city and all that, right? That didn't exactly translate well. Aside from the fact that that was not the Birds of Prey, that was more Gotham City Sirens with a bunch of add-ons like Renee Montoya and Jubilee cosplaying as Cassie Kane, but that's a different story. But yeah, that movie didn't exactly pan out well, right? I think that because this is a video game and because this is a video game that was played by little kids back in the 1990s, right? I think I was around what 7 years old at least when I first played this. I think that they're gonna try to go with a lighter adaptation, and I don't think that would necessarily be true to the spirit of the games, especially the first two, which are very much that gritty, violent, you know, heroic gang violence, beat 'em up type of thing. So you have that. So there is that in my opinion. Now here's the thing. I've seen a lot of people have a glimmer of hope for this because, as it says here, there's the script. The script is being done by the John Wick creator. Now, here's the thing. I may be wrong. Maybe he's the perfect guy for this, and maybe it will work out after all. Believe me, I want to be wrong. I would love to see a good Streets of Rage adaptation. I just don't think it's gonna happen. And let me explain why I have an issue with him being behind this. It's not that I think he's a bad person or a bad creator. It's that his most famous creation is John Wick. John Wick is nothing like Streets of Rage. John Wick is closer to films like Death Wish. John Wick is closer to things like The Punisher than it is Streets of Rage. John Wick is a revenge fantasy. That's the thing. It is one man's revenge against the people who murdered his dog, or the people who wronged him, or with Death Wish, the people who murdered his daughter or his wife or whatever. Right? Those are singular character. Right? It's focused on one character. It's one character's fight against crime. Right? It's one character taking it to the streets. Right? And inflicting the violence onto the criminals that they inflict onto others, right? Streets of Rage doesn't work like that. No beat 'em up really works like that. Streets of Rage as a film is probably closer to stuff like, again, The Warriors, um, Birds of Prey, as terrible as that movie is. Uh, Lethal Weapon, even though that was more of a buddy cop film, right? Again, some Die Hard, not too much. But again, it's the idea of a group, a team of people, right? Right, coming together to save the city, or in the case of Streets of Rage 2, to rescue Adam and to bring down the criminal empire. It is a group effort. It is not just one man's revenge tale. It's a group thing. And it actually has a much more, despite its violence, it has a much more, I would say, positive motivation than necessarily works like John Wick or Punisher or Death Wish do. My personal opinion. So I'm not entirely certain he can write that type of script, right? I'm not certain he can do that. Maybe he can. Maybe he can. But again, his most famous work thus far is something that is, in my opinion, diametrically opposed to sort of the theme or the feel of Streets of Rage, which is less personal vengeance and more heroic violence, right? If anything, the old Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film from the 1990s is probably closer in theme and feel, although it's not as violent to Streets of Rage than necessarily John Wick is, right? So you have that. Then you have things like, for example, just the settings and which levels are they going to include? What's the soundtrack gonna be? I'm not interested if they don't have at least some uh, um, um, Kojiro, right? If the Jesus, what's his name? Kojiro Kuzo. I forget his name at the moment, but the Japanese artist behind the soundtrack, right? His name escapes me at the moment, but him. I think it's Koshiro. I forget his last name at the moment, but his soundtrack is part of what makes the games so iconic. In particular, Streets of Rage 2, right? That is probably one of the most best known what's what I'm looking for. Best known soundtracks in gaming from that time period, right? I would say it's as iconic as the Street Fighter 2 soundtrack, personally. Yuzo Koshiro, I think is his name is, right? I think that's his name. But anyway, so you need that. I don't want to hear like period specific music, right? I want the soundtrack from those games, or at least some sort of reference to them, right? In the music of the film. Then you have to wonder about certain stages, like how are they going to recreate certain things, like the bridge under construction in Streets of Rage 1 and Streets of Rage 2. In particular, in 2, where you literally have bikers coming from, like, I'm assuming off the top of the bridge, coming, flying through the air to attack you, then I don't think they'll have too much trouble recreating some of the special moves because so many of them are just martial arts based, right? The only thing is that maybe some of Blaze's chi attacks, right? But I think a lot of the special moves will be can be easily replicated because it's just martial arts, and martial arts is very popular these days, possibly even more than it was in the series heyday. So I think that'll be okay. But then you have to wonder about how they're going to create certain characters like Max, right, the wrestler. Do you hire Dave Batista? Right? Do you hire him to play Max? Do you hire someone else to play the Ultimate Warrior stand-in that appears later on in the game? I think his name is Abadede or Abadidi, something like that. A villainous wrestler character. Or what about Arbear, the boxer, right? Who do you get to play him, right? And other characters like the Blanca lookalike that you run into in certain levels later on in the game. Who do you get to play that guy? Right, so there's questions about that. How do you recreate certain characters? What about Shiva, the evil martial artist guy, at the end of the game? How do you recreate certain moments in the game, like the elevator? You're fighting off all these bad guys and all this stuff, right? Then there's, especially in today's world, right? Let me go to the bottom of this article, right? Streets of Rage. Okay, here we go. Gonna read this part. It says, Streets of Rage first hit the video game scene all the way back in 1991 as a side-scrolling beat-em-up for the Sega Genesis. True. The simplistic story, also true, followed three playable cop characters, Adam, Axel, and Blaze. Here is our problem. Do you really think in this day and age, in the age of George Floyd, in the age of BLM, that they're really going to allow at least two of your characters, Axel and Blaze? Maybe Adam, but I'm not sure if they're gonna have Adam as a regular character. He might be the guy you have to rescue. Because I honestly think that the adaptation is going to be closer to Streets of Rage 2 because that's the most popular title. But even if Adam, Axel, and Blaze are all playable, right? Do you really think that they're going to allow three cop characters in a modern day Hollywood film where you have hashtags like all cops are bastards and all this other stuff? Can you imagine the articles by Kotaku and other game sites that would criticize this, although it would be totally in line with the early video games? Right? I don't think that they could do that. So the question is, how would they reimagine these characters? Are they ex-cops who left because of corruption? That would make sense. Are they vigilantes who are just tired of the violence and decide to take the fight to the streets? Who knows? But I doubt that they're going to be cops because that's just not in vogue these days. And finally, my last concern, or at least the last one that I can think of at the moment, which is this. In the end, Streets of Rage, right? Even Streets of Rage 4 is a product of the 1990s. You know, let's say late 80s, early 90s, right? Because it's very much in the early games are very much influenced by sort of the Hollywood image of New York at that time in the 70s and 80s, right? This type of game, these type of films were perfectly fine and they were standard. They were normal in the 80s and 90s. We're not in the 80s and 90s anymore. I know that Hollywood is into nostalgia and they keep trying to bring these franchises back, but the fact of the matter is that those times are gone. They are now 20 years, 25 years, 30, 35 years, 40 years in the past. It is over. Streets of Rage worked because of the time period it was in. You could be dark and edgy and sexy, right? And push the boundaries in the 80s and the 90s, and your audience would generally be in favor. Mortal Kombat, for example, pushed the envelope hard when it came to the violence you could depict in a video game at that time. We've seen with games like Mortal Kombat, with movies or adaptations, let's say like Cowboy Bebop, or recently with the GTA games. And yes, I'm well aware of the whole GTA 5. They're removing the supposed transphobia. I will do a video about that eventually. But all of these franchises, Streets of Rage, GTA, Mortal Kombat, etc., 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 were made in the 1990s. One second. As I was saying, a lot of these franchises are a product of their time. They are filled with tropes and ideas and themes that were popular in media at that time. Those times are long gone. As a wrestling fan, I will always love the Attitude Era, but the Attitude Era is long gone. A lot of these franchises have had a very, very, very rough time and have not translated well in the modern day because the modern day is so censorious and so puritanical, or rather say faux puritanical, I would say, and are so obsessed with cleaning up the supposedly problematic elements of these works. At the heart and soul of these works is stripped from them. The problematic elements are what give these works not only their sort of calling card, like for example, Mortal Kombat, it was always the violence. People complained about the sexuality or the sexy costumes. It was always the violence that came first. The sexy costumes were very just mid 1990s. Didn't even get sexy till about MK3. But still, these problematic elements that people claim to be so offended by these days, 30 years later, are what give these older franchises their calling card, their names. Again, the game is called Streets of Rage, not Streets of Nice, not Streets of Calm, Streets of Rage. It's gotta be violent. It's gotta be dark. It's gotta be gritty. And I don't think that they're willing to do that. Like many things from the 80s and 90s, they were good for their time. We'll always love them for what they were, but we don't need a new version. And we certainly don't need what I think is going to end up being a toned down, tame, sanitized version. Because as we've seen with Rockstar and many other franchises, especially in movies, right? Star Wars, Star Trek, Terminator, all these other franchises, right? They have been toned down, they have been tamed. Male characters are not allowed to be men, quite frankly. Female characters are made overly masculine. The black characters are typically emasculated as well. And the thing is that Streets of Rage works because it's about everybody being a violent ass kicker. Right? Everybody's just a violent badass and they're going around beating the hell out of thugs to save the city in one night. That's all that really matters. And I don't think that's what's going to happen in this movie. And again, I could be wrong. Believe me, I would love to be wrong. I would love for this to come out and be a big hit. And for me to make a video at some point and go, you know what? I was wrong. I just don't think I will be. If anything, I think that this might end up closer to, say, like the Mortal Kombat 2021 thing, where it wasn't Mortal Kombat at all, where they literally created a new lead character nobody asked for and literally bumped Liu Kang to the background. That's what I'm afraid of. That's what I'm worried for. Streets of Rage for me will always be 1992. I'm 7 years old and I'm having the time of my life. I don't need you to do a updated, re-release, remake, remastered live action version. Leave it alone. Just let it be. Like a beautiful song, it does not need to be remade or remastered for the modern day. Just let it be. Let it be. Oh, Mother Mary, just let it be. But anyway, that's the video. Please let me know what you think, and I will see you all in the next one. Have a good day or night wherever you are. Bye.